solve the mystery of the deep. Robert Shaw,
You've only got 3 minutes.
Jacqueline Bisset,
Something's got me up.
Nick Nolte,
There's treasure down there, Gail. I know. I got a feeling, so I gotta go look.
Louis Gossett,
Forced me to take what you would not let me pay for.
Eli Wallach.
Morphine. 98,000 ampules.
Is anything worth the terror of the deep? Rated PG.
Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1977 thriller, The Deep. Now, to me personally, this film should be called The Disappointment, because this is such a disappointing movie. It's not the worst film I've ever seen. I would say it's average. I would say it's a mediocre, but that's so unbelievably frustrating considering all of the elements that are at play here, all of the things that are a part of this production that are legitimately solid or legitimately strong. It's one of those movies that, despite everything that it has going for it, because the screenplay is just so weak, it sinks. And that's something that really is quite a bummer when it comes to this movie, because there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of things about this film that I think are very high quality, from the production and art design, from the gorgeous, just jaw-dropping underwater cinematography, to the really solid, strong cast, to the wonderful score by John Barry. It's a film that just needed a script that was on the same level as the rest of the spectacle to prevent it from drifting off into the ocean and taking the audience's overall investment along with it. Now, the film was directed by Peter Yates, who, after this, he would do a film like Krull, or he would do An Innocent Man, or he would do another drama. He seems to be a director who focused a lot more on dramas, human dramas, less on these kind of films. That being said, he still put a lot of passion, effort, time, and genuine energy into this production. He learned how to scuba dive, he learned how to direct underwater, and I think that paid off, because one of the positives that this film has going for it is definitely Peter Yates's capable, fairly consistent direction. I would say the underwater photography is more impressive than the scenes that are shot above the water or on dry land, but I'm not going to say those scenes were shot poorly either, except for some rare exceptions. There are some fight scenes that lack an extra punch, an extra bit of adrenaline. There are some other scenes here and there that just fall a little flat. Even some of the underwater photography seems like it lingers on some shots a little bit too long. But overall, I felt the direction, it was pretty steady. He definitely was more than capable when it comes to the selection of his shots, the use of angles, and the use of different kinds of techniques to really provide as much tension and as much intrigue or adventure as he possibly could with the camera. And it seems like it was a pretty difficult production, considering all of the factors involved. I mean, working in what was considered to be the largest underwater set known to man at the time, dealing with all this new equipment, directing while he's underwater, dealing with this cast that at times was probably a little difficult because of the really troubled production, and of course all the other factors involved with that, of having the studio and the producer breathing down your neck, trying to get you to do things a certain way, or not being too happy with how you're handling things one day versus the next. So overall, I think Peter Yates, he was a solid, sturdy presence here, and he did help the film tread water at the very least. And I can't sing enough praises for the underwater photography. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. The screenplay, though, by Peter Benchley and Tracy Keenan Wynn, that is where this film drowns. And it just is not able to reach the top. It's not able to really live up to the full potential of everything else that's going on with this movie. This film is a perfect example of how important a strong and effective script is to a film's success. You can have all of these other elements that work well, but if the story sucks, the screenplay is substandard, it's just gonna sink. It's gonna sink like a rock. And the focus that this story has on this really boring drug drama, where you have the villain Cloche, who wants these bottles of morphine that this couple found while they were vacationing in Bermuda. So he wants these bottles, and he wants to use them for his drug trade. But along the way, the couple actually discover some sunken treasure. So this becomes a search for treasure while they are being watched and surveyed by Cloche, this drug dealer, and his men. And the couple also run into a treasure hunter who decides to tag along with them. And you're like, oh, okay, you know, treasure hunting and drug dealers. That has potential for being a suspenseful, thrilling movie where they're trying to look for their treasure, but then they're also being stalked by these drug dealers, and they don't know who to trust, and they always have to keep looking around in the corners to see who might be coming for them. And you're like, okay, that has potential, but potential doesn't mean anything if you don't live up to it. And the drug drama, the aspect of the screenplay that deals with the drug trade, is boring. It's not exciting. It's not thrilling. The villain, as a result, because of how substandard and subpar the script is, feels like he's an afterthought. There's a good chunk of the movie where Louis Gossett Jr.'s character just disappears. He doesn't even show up for an absolutely huge chunk of the film until the end of the movie. And he's given this really grand denouement to his character. And it never feels like it's earned or justified, because this character never really feels like he's that strong or that effective or that powerful of a villain or that respectable of a threat. And there's like really kind of bizarre things that happen here. Like there's a scene where Cloche sends some of his men dressed up like voodoo priests to torment Jacqueline Bisset's character, Gail, while she's staying in a hotel. And they do a voodoo ritual with a chicken foot and blood. And it never leads to anything. He just sent them to do it to terrorize her. But then you never see voodoo or any of this stuff brought up again. So what was the point? It's not like he was using voodoo to like curse them or anything. Nothing ever comes of it. It just felt completely pointless at the end of the day. Instead of having this whole subplot about a drug deal and about trying to hide these uh, vials of morphine from Cloche, or trying to make a deal with Cloche. It should have just focused on the treasure hunt, on the cast of Romer Treese, played by Robert Shaw, Gail, Jacqueline Bisset's character, and David, played by Nick Nolte, teaming up and trying to find provenance for the treasure that they found underwater, and staying one step ahead, or at least trying to stay one step ahead of Cloche and his men, who have found out that they have found a treasure, and so they want the treasure. So now it's just a simple game of cat and mouse, or it's a race against time to see who's gonna get to the treasure first, and see who's gonna sabotage the other. And to me, that would have been a much more effective film. And then you would have the majority of the film taking place underwater, because that's really the selling point of the movie. And I would cut the running time down to where it's only like an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes. Most of it's underwater, where you're dealing with shark attacks and moray eels, and having to deal with Cloche and his men, and you're having to try to fend them off, and while you're also trying to find provenance for the treasure. And I just think that would be a much more effective, enjoyable, and entertaining movie that wouldn't really feel like such a tease. And speaking of teases, might as well mention the cast here. Jacqueline Bisset, she plays Gail, and she's the one that's all over the advertising, and she was the one that was fondly remembered by a lot of people, a lot of men in the audience, because of her wet t-shirt that shows her nipples. And I could see why. I could see why for a lot of young men in the 70s, like this might have been their sexual awakening. Like, oh my God, Jacqueline Bisset in a wet t-shirt. That's what I remember about The Deep. Um, and it's fitting because the film is such a tease with its potential, with its underwater photography and all of that. And then it has this character that's, for the most part, remembered for being uh, a sex object. She's really, honestly, not much more than that. She's there for sex appeal. She has a few scenes here and there where she's using her smarts to try to figure out the provenance, or she gets involved and tries to help Nick Nolte and Robert Shaw near the end to try to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. But other than that, she doesn't really do a whole lot. She's a damsel in distress for the most part. The performance is okay, but it's definitely one of those instances where she really was there for the sex appeal. Robert Shaw, he plays Romer Treese in this. He gets top billing. Apparently, he decided to do this movie because he thought it had a lot of potential. And he's right, it did, but it never really fully lived up to it because the script just wasn't good enough. I don't know why he looked at the script and thought, yeah, this is going to be a winner, just the way it is, but apparently that's the case. There's a lot of moments with this performance where it feels like the producers or the writers or the studio is trying to make him be Quint 2.0, and it just doesn't work. It just does not pan out. But at the end of the day, I still think it's a pretty good performance by Robert Shaw, one of his better acting roles. You could tell that he did have some passion for this role. He took it seriously. He acted like a true professional with this character and with this performance. And he did a lot of his own stunts underwater and all of that. Very physically demanding role, and I felt that he definitely handled all of that very well. And so did Jacqueline Bisset and Nick Nolte. Pretty much anyone else in the cast that had to do a lot of the underwater scenes. I felt they all held their own really well in that regard. Nick Nolte, This was one of the first big roles for him. A lot of people look at this as the film that put him on the map, and I can see why. He showed a lot of spark here. He showed a lot of potential in terms of a guy who could become a leading man in Hollywood. It's very gruff, very no nonsense, and I felt he definitely had a good presence about him in the film as well. I wish he had a little bit more to do at times, and I don't really feel that the chemistry between him and Jacqueline Bisset is really that strong. At best, it's just there, but I never really felt like this was a really uh, good couple. I never really felt like they clicked on the same level as other films and other couples that I've seen. And I don't think it helps that there's like one scene where they have what could be really a falling out and they argue with one another. And it just seems like at that moment, the relationship just really is only being held together by this search for provenance. It doesn't really feel like they truly are madly, deeply in love with one another. At least not to me personally. And then Louis Gossett Jr., poor Louis Gossett Jr., I mean, he's trying to be uh, ruthless and he's trying to be a memorable villain, but he's given absolutely nothing to sink his teeth into. So the most memorable thing about his character is how close gets his head bitten off by a moray eel at the end of the movie. It's not really any of his lines of dialogue. It's not really any of his sequences. It's the scene where a dummy, a fake head, a model of his character gets his head bitten off. And it's too bad because Louis Gossett Jr. is a very capable and very talented actor, and it just feels like he was completely wasted in a nothing role. Uh, Eli Wallach, I liked his performance as Adam Coffin. I thought that character was interesting because there was a connection that he had to the shipwreck because he was actually on the ship when it sank. And I like the fact that there was a conflict between him and Treese, where Treese and this guy were friends and acquaintances, but Treese didn't want him to go on the trip underwater because he didn't want him to get hurt. But he viewed that as Treese trying to screw him over, so that leads him to forming an easy alliance with the villains, and it blows up in his face. There's also some other actors like Dick Anthony Williams as Slake, Earl Maynard as Ronald, Bob Miner as Wiley. But that's really the main cast. There's also a deleted scene. Yeah, there's a whole different version of the movie. It was something that aired on TV back in the day. It was like a 3-hour cut of the film, and there's a whole bit with the original captain of the one of the shipwrecks, and there's a whole scene involving that guy, and it's not in the theatrical cut. I think that the captain was played by Cameron Mitchell. I think that's who was playing the captain in that sequence. But yeah, the cast, it's not really that bad. I mean, Jacqueline Bisset, kind of flat at times in terms of her line delivery. Nick Nolte kind of seems like he's just waiting for something to do. And Louis Gossett Jr.'s got a really pathetic, weak role to work with. But I would say it's still, at the end of the day, definitely one of the things that float when it comes to this movie that really do manage to swim to the surface. Um, it features some other really excellent technical aspects of the production. I mean, the cinematography by Christopher Chalice is just gorgeous. I mean, the underwater scenes, they're mesmerizing. They really are. And a big part of that is due to the work by Christopher Chalice and Peter Yates and the other second or third unit underwater photographers. If you are going to see this film for any reason, it's to see the underwater sequences. I think this is a movie you should see at least once for the underwater scenes. They are that good and that well shot. Uh, it also featured some pretty excellent top of the line editing by David Bertolowski. I don't really blame the editor for the pacing problems or some of the moments where the film's a little bit too lackadaisical, a little bit too lazy. It's just bobbing in the water a little bit too much, and not really going anywhere. The music by John Barry, I think, is amazing. I love this score. It's definitely of its time, very 70s disco infused score. But I just feel it captures the vibe of a undersea adventure so perfectly. It's a very haunting, but at the same time really catchy and adventurous and quirky and fun score. I just think it's a really solid and memorable score, and definitely one of his best. John Barry's a composer that for a lot of people is known mostly for his work on the James Bond films, and I feel his work in The Deep as well as other movies is every bit as good as his work in the Bond movies, and that's another thing about this film that is just excellent. It really is. This score is top notch, really good stuff. And I also want to mention the production and art design. I think the production direction, the production design and art direction, sorry, I got the two mixed up. I think it's very impressive considering what they were able to do. There were a lot of shots here that I think for the time period are very immersive and very impressive in terms of the visual effects. Uh, I think the moray eel, for the most part, I thought that was a pretty nice effect. I thought the mechanical moray eel looked pretty real, worked pretty well underwater as well, which was nice to see compared to a lot of other things involving underwater uh, sea creatures over the years where it just doesn't work. But then again, I don't know how many takes it took for them to get the right shot. And it was just fun and unique to see a moray eel in that kind of instance anyway. And there are a lot of other scenes that deal with real threats, with real sharks and sequences that are shot underwater, that just have a certain reality to them that definitely does create some gripping moments. I would say one of the most effective bits of tension in the film is due to a moment that was real, where the horror, where the terror was real. It involves Gail. Her character is swimming underwater in the beginning, checking out the shipwreck. Her arm gets caught under the wreck by the eel, and in this sequence, Jacqueline Bisset was doubled by a stunt double. Her name was Jackie Kilbride. And in this scene, Jackie's supposed to, there's supposed to be like some kind of wooden stick or something like that. It was supposed to like grab her arm. Well, something went wrong and it pulled her arm too hard, and when her arm got pulled underneath the wreck, she dislocated her shoulder. And that sequence is so intense. And the main reason for that is because the pain and the anguish that the stunt double was showcasing was genuine. It was real. And I just want to give Jackie Kilbride a ton of credit for just powering through that, because that had to hurt like hell. And she just powered through that, got the shot done, because they couldn't do another take. This was a multi-camera setup. This was also during the time period where underwater photography this extensive was something that had never been attempted before. So the underwater film was limited. They didn't have a lot of reels. So it's one of those things where these scenes had to be done in one take for the most part. Maybe 2 takes at the most. But other than rare exceptions, everything had to be done in one take because of everything that's involved with the production and with the cameras and with all of the complications that arise with this fairly new technology. So I definitely feel that's one of the sequences where the film really does live up to its tagline, which is incredibly misleading. Makes you think it's a horror movie, and it's just not even remotely close to anything like that. But that moment, that was some real genuine terror. And it's because someone was actually in a moment where they were extremely vulnerable and were in extreme pain, and it was captured on film. And there's other moments like that too, where the cast is fending off a frenzy of sharks in the climax, and that scene with I think it was Robert Shaw, and there's like all these freaking sharks around him. It is a astonishing sequence because of just how close these sharks are to him, and just how well the scene was shot, and it's real sharks. You can't get more real than real. You want to complain about the effects of the shark in Jaws? All right. Can't complain about the effects of the sharks in the deep because those are real sharks. And that's the kind of stuff too that you would never see nowadays because it would be too dangerous and there'd be too many things involved in terms of lawsuits and all of that. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this is the disappointment. The story is not as deep as it thinks it is, and as a result, it doesn't deeply resonate as much as it could, and it just does not fully live up to all of the potential that it has. There are elements here that are great, that are really wonderful, and things that I really like about this movie, but its pacing is just way too slow and lethargic because of the subpar screenplay and some of the characterization, and it's a real shame. It really is. It feels like the efforts of everyone involved with the underwater photographers and the actors and the production designers and the art directors, it feels like a lot of that went to waste, and just was nothing but trash adrift on the ocean because of the fact that there wasn't a story or a script that was good, that was of high enough quality for all of this hard work to really pay off. But anyway, I don't know what else to say about The Deep, except thanks for watching my review. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.